Hey, so the video you're about to watch is a presentation I did on what I call the Testosterone Template, how to optimize your T without TRT. Now, it's a holistic approach to not only addressing testosterone, but energy as a whole, metabolism, body composition, energy focus, all these things that we want to improve upon and enhance. We're going to be covering the root cause to ultimately what drives those things. Now, I've been practicing for over 16 years with functional medicine, personal training, nutrition coaching, strength coaching, all these things to provide the best holistic approach to optimizing these things. And this is the deepest root cause that I have found to driving all these things and enhancing them. And what's cool about this is that it doesn't require advanced lab testing. It doesn't require supplementation. It just requires taking advantage of the free energy sources that we have around us. And I'll explain that in the presentation so you can dig into that. If you want to find out more information about how you can personalize this into your life after the presentation, I have an offer for you. So if you want to take advantage of that, stay tuned to the end. But for now, take notes. Let me know if you have any aha moments or questions after the presentation. I'll be happy to answer those for you. And I would love to hear what you think about the testosterone template. That's it for now. Enjoy the video, and I'll see you on the other side.
Guys, thanks for attending. Appreciate you guys coming out. And we're going to kick things off with what I call the testosterone template. This is how we elevate your T without TRT, cracking the quantum code to unleash your full potential. So, really the main goal here that I want to accomplish with this presentation is to change how you think about food, health, and reality. Now, we grew up with the calories in, calories out, food being medicine. I think we all understand that, but we're going to dig into a lot deeper than micronutrients, calories, all these things. We're going to dig into a little bit deeper of what really makes up that food beyond micronutrients and calories. So what we experience in terms of symptoms with low T, it'd be low energy, weight gain, skin conditions, hormone imbalance, poor sleep, gut issues, joint pain, brain fog. This is just through wear and tear in life. We demand more of ourselves than anybody puts on us, and breakdown is inevitable to occur. So I've always been a proponent of what you put in is what you're going to get out, and the more quality fuel you put in, the more you're going to be able to perform. So it's just the old adage of, you wouldn't put 87 octane in a Ferrari, right? You got to put high octane stuff in that. So we want to treat ourselves the same way. So all those things, what is the cause? I think in Western medicine, the main thing is they treat the symptom, not the underlying cause. And that's where I want to dig in a little deeper here, because as you guys have been a part of, most of you know, it's micronutrient therapy, lab testing, figuring out the deeper layers to things to fix your T, to optimize metabolism and detoxification. But this is going to go even deeper here. So what causes these things is what I call the inflammation continuum. This is really the common thread that I see amongst guys when they're dealing with weight gain, low T, low energy, poor sleep, gut health issues, and the like, is we got a continuum of things. And this could be, I could do a whole presentation on this, but stress is multifactorial. We have life, we have business, we have relationships, we have physical stressors, we got all different things, but we're going to highlight a couple key stressors that we can take control of today, now. And oftentimes it's not about the situations that you're dealt, but more so how you handle yourself in those situations. The only thing you can control is yourself, right? So we're going to go over blue light, non-native EMFs, toxins, as they contribute to inflammation, which is the underlying cause to those issues. Moving on to food, we got non-local, non-seasonal foods, GMOs, seed oils, which we talked about earlier. We're going to highlight on some of those things and how it relates to inflammation and those conditions. Ultimately, those conditions, they make life less enjoyable. They lower your energy. They lower your performance, how you look, feel, and perform. So no matter what your goals are, this is going to relate to enhancing your life, enhancing who you are, making the most out of it. So the last one is deficiencies. So, micronutrient deficiencies are apparent. Love, play, connection in different ways, whether it be for business or relationships is a deficiency. Mental, like lacking knowledge in something could be a deficiency. Knowing you want to go somewhere, but you don't have the knowledge. But we're going to dig into a little bit more of the foundational things that go above and beyond the micronutrients or the thoughts and things that we have in our life, we're going to go into sunlight, water, and sleep as some key deficiencies that I think we overlook. And I think the overall encompassing thing here is some of these foundational things that we're talking about are so simple that we overlook them. I'm speaking for myself too. Like, I've dug into the rabbit hole of functional medicine, lab testing, advanced lab testing, connecting with doctors and going through the whole mix of, molds and toxins and gut bacteria. But these are things that are actually going to influence that. So when we talk about food intolerances, when we talk about all these things, we're talking about even more root cause than what causes the inflammation or intolerance or the mold in general. Does that make sense? So deeper root cause here. So to recap everything, when we look at inflammation that causes all these things, I want to reframe your mind and look at inflammation as simply defined as a loss of energy. So when you're inflamed, when you got a busted knee or you got a back issue or you're sluggish or brain fog, it's an energy leak. You're not able to perform at your highest, or it's something you got to compensate for. Willpower will take a hold of it. You can power through these things, but how long can you power through them before something else breaks or you miss something and an opportunity passes by because you weren't as sharp as you could be, whatever that is. So to bring it into the quantum realm and kind of understand how everything is connected, I want to look at the bigger picture here and look at how loss of energy actually relates to mass and size. So when we talk about weight gain, when we talk about body composition, body fat percentage, and all these different things, these metrics that we can measure physically, I brought up this slide here to look at what happens to a star. Most people think when a star loses energy, you have this high dense star right here that is very bright and very small in size, but very, very heavy. What happens as it goes into old age is it actually expands. So a loss of energy is actually expansion. It gets bigger, right? And so much like the stars, the same thing happens with us, right? This is visceral fat, internal fat right here. This is an individual right here that's a little bit leaner, obviously leaner, but you can see the difference. When we lose energy, it is the mass that is gained and not necessarily the right type of way. So you could have a 220-pound individual at 30% body fat versus a 220-pound individual at 10% body fat. So that's kind of the difference right there. So to continue to reframe our mind and look at things at a deeper level, what we're made of, the body, the cells, and those cells are made up of atoms, protons, neutrons, electrons, which we're going to dig into a little bit deeper here. Those cells, 50 trillion cells that make up your body, all contain mitochondria, this organelle, this organ inside the cell that powers the cell. And if your cells are being powered, that means you are being powered, right? So these cells made up of atoms are being controlled by the mitochondria, which actually is an organ that electrifies your body. We're an electromagnetic being. Everything has a charge on it. Your cell has, I believe, 70 trilovolts. Every cell has a negative 70 trilovolt charge. So you compound that by trillions of cells, and, correct me if I'm wrong on the math, but it turns out to be something like to the tune of like 20 to 30 trillion volts in terms of your potential power in the body. So we're electrical beings. There's a lot of power in us, and this is how we really conduct and maintain energy or lose energy if we really break it down. So hundreds of mitochondria in each of these trillions of cells that you have in your body ultimately are there to produce and charge the water in your system, you being 80% water. The goal with the mitochondria is actually to charge that, electrically charge that water so that there can be communication between the cells. So you're a big battery. That's basically what you want to look at. So you're a big battery composed of these mitochondria. And as we age, or as we experience this inflammation, aging is not just the cause, but it's the stress load, the consistency of constantly being exposed to these stressors. The mitochondria become a little bit less functional, and it's not able to charge the water in your body as much, which leads to inflammation, pain, weight gain, and all these dysfunctions. So what causes these metabolic stressors? EMFs from the phone, ear pods, wireless, Wi-Fi. We're exposed to new technology. You know, there are waves carrying through, and the electromagnetic frequencies are like radio waves that we can't see, but they're here. This is how we're able to communicate and connect to the internet wirelessly. Our phones give off radiation, the earbuds, the artificial light and LEDs. This causes all sorts of disturbances in the body. And as I said, think about those trillions of cells. There's electricity going through them. There's a radio frequency going through. What happens when you got multiple frequencies coming through that? It can distort it. It's like putting on the radio and going to a shitty channel and you can't hear the music that you want to hear. You got to turn off the radio eventually. So there's a miscommunication going on there. This leads to poor sleep, which compounds all the effects. Breathing, improper breathing, so breathing through the mouth. This is a way of actually reducing your oxygen intake. So when you breathe in through the nose, for instance, you increase your nitric oxide production by up to 50,000%. So NO2 is a vasodilator. It expands the blood vessels in your body to be able to deliver oxygen to tissues distant and near. And the purpose of oxygen is not to breathe oxygen into your cells, but to actually feed the mitochondria to break that oxygen molecule down to give it a negative electric charge. So the purpose of breathing is actually to charge your body, not to oxygenate your body, in a sense. So it's another way to look at it. And then the last one that I just want to point out is indoors, right? Being indoors, artificial lighting throughout the day starts to separate us from the source that ultimately gives us health and energy.
This is what happens when you turn on your 4G or 5G phone.
Right now, we are measuring the radio frequencies of the towers that are emitting and pulsating frequencies and fields around us. And Gaitan is just holding up this meter and it's measuring microvolts, how much his body is absorbing. And the phone is now on airplane. And if we put the phone out of airplane and just look for cell phone towers, you see these numbers go up. So if you hold this near your genitals, you see how much this can actually affect you and lower your testosterone. So if I put this out of airplane mode, you see this jumping. This is very high readings. And if we put it on 4G, then it happens the same or even worse. You see right there, 3,000, 4,000 microvolts. And ideally, we should be below 30. And if we go back to airplane mode, it calms down. But even on airplane mode, we are still way above what we should because the cell phone towers around us.
So just to give an example of what's going on there, you know, we're carrying these things around in our pocket all day, every day. And right next to, you know, where testosterone is being produced. And again, that radio frequency is causing a disturbance in your mitochondria, and there's a lot packed down there that's just causing a lot of miscommunication, a lot of stress. I mean, try to do work while you got the kids yelling, you got the dog barking, and you got, you know, everything else crashing down around you. You got to silence everything to focus on one thing, and that's basically what your cells are going through with all this radio frequency going on. So the takeaway, loss of energy leads to low mitochondrial function, and low mitochondria function is a loss of electrons. So these things get dispersed and they get lost in the channel. So instead of being utilized and connected, they get dispersed and lost. And what happens is these turn into reactive oxidative species, right? So these are the basically the rusting or the oxidization of your tissue and your cells, which cause them to die off, and then you got inflammation that occurs, the loss of electrons. So to reframe even further what inflammation is, it's simply a loss of electrons. Look at yourself as an electric being. What you're consuming, what you surround yourself with, what you do is all around revolving around how many electrons you have. Too many protons, not enough electrons, leads to inflammation. which leads to the issues at hand. So when we look at it and just break it down very simply, we're not talking calories, we're not talking vitamins or minerals, we're not talking macros, we're looking at strictly what those are made of at the anatomic level, and that's what's going on in your mitochondria and your cells, is how to manage these electrons, how to cultivate and hold on to them, because just like the star, dense and bright, it's holding on to its energy. And when it starts to lose the energy, it expands, right? So we want to contract and keep it tight. So the cure, if you're losing electrons, what's the cure? You want to gain and retain electrons. So we're going to highlight, there's several more here, but I want to highlight these key three right here. Most of our energy we think is consumed through food. 90% of what we consume is the idea is I need energy, so I need to eat food. That's not wrong, but that's what we focus on as a whole. And we're missing out on the other two big factors, which is water and sunlight. And these things are going to offload a lot of what you need here. So you can take advantage of multiple things that these provide that food does not necessarily provide. And it's not negating the effects of good nutritionally dense food, but I'm just saying that we need to look at the bigger picture and look at this holistically and see how this all impacts us in different ways. So I'm going to be showing a video here. It's about a 15-minute video that Dr. Polak, he phrased the term fourth phase of water, which looks at a different phase of water. So we have vapor, we have ice, and then we have liquid, right? So three phases of water. But there's a fourth phase of water that they're finding, and it'll explain in the video. And this is going to help you really understand the atomic level of what's going on with electrons, protons within water, and what's actually going on in your body, how information and energy is transferred and utilized, and how we can take advantage of it.
Water, cells, and life. That covers a lot of ground. But I want to be more specific. I want to talk about where do we get our energy? Now, obviously, we get a lot of energy from food, but I'm going to introduce the idea that we might get additional energy from light. Now, why do I raise this question? Well, I raise the question because nature commonly uses light to supply energy. For example, green algae. They photosynthesize, they take in light, and the light creates energy. And the same is true of some bacteria. They also photosynthesize. But what we know best, of course, is green plants. So green plants soak up light and convert that light into chemical energy. And that chemical energy then drives whatever the plant does, metabolism, growth, bending, you name it. And all of this works through water. The roots of the plant absorb water, and that water goes to the leaves. And what happens in the leaves is that when they receive light, they take the water that's inside them and split the water into positive and negative, H plus, OH minus. This is the first step of photosynthesis. And it's driven by light. So light, you might say light creates this kind of battery with plus and minus. And the question is, are we also solar powered? Do we use light to get some of our energy? And I'll show you that we actually do. We engage in the first step of photosynthesis, that is the splitting of water into the negative and positive. Mother Nature, when she created us, hasn't forsaken this wonderful mechanism of using light to get energy. And I'll show you also that that leads to many insights in terms of our own health. Everybody knows that our body is mostly water. And in our laboratory at the University of Washington, we're studying water, and we came upon something really interesting. When water meets certain materials, these are hydrophilic or water-loving materials, which means that if you have a surface and you drop the water, it spreads out instead of beating up the way it does, for example, on Teflon. So what happens is that the water molecules split into the positive and negative, and the negative ones line up, as you see here, next to the hydrophilic material. This is actually negatively charged water is, in fact, a different phase of water. It's not even H2O, it's actually H3O2, is what we found. And we refer to this fourth phase, if you will, of water that is beyond solid, liquid, and vapor. This fourth phase is semi-crystalline water as EZ. So what's EZ? EZ stands for exclusion zone. And the reason we called it exclusion zone when we found it is as this phase of water builds, it pushes out everything that's inside of the water, that is solutes, particles, whatever. And so we called it logically exclusion zone, and EZ is, well, easy to remember. So essentially this is potential energy because it's just like a battery of water. And all batteries, of course, need to get charged, and the question is, well, where does the energy come from to charge this battery? Your cell phone needs to get charged, it's battery, and this is another battery. And the answer came from a student who was doing something that he was not supposed to do. So he was carrying out an experiment, and this experiment is using some hydrophilic material and putting water next to it, just as I've shown you. He took a lamp. The lamp was sitting right next to the experimental chamber, and just for fun, he shined the lamp on the chamber, and what he saw was really astonishing. He noticed that because of the illumination, the exclusion zone, or EZ, expands. And it expanded hugely, and when he took the lamp away, it came back to its original shape, which is a thin band of EZ you see at the upper left running parallel to the surface. So, well, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you shine light, it gets bigger, and maybe the light is what's responsible, the photons are responsible for providing the energy to grow this exclusion zone. So obviously we were really impressed by this student's result, and we began to study different wavelengths of light, ranging from the ultraviolet through the visible light through the infrared light, and we found that by far the most effective light was infrared. Infrared is actually all over. It's hard to get rid of, and it's not just inside, it's outside too. And this is literally free energy. We learned about free energy in our chemistry textbooks, but this is literally free. It doesn't cost you a nickel. It's there. And because it's there all the time, it means that when you have water next to a hydrophilic material, you always have EZ water. And of course, if you add more light, then the EZ grows. You see, so light is basically feeding the growth. So this feature, this light-induced separation of charge, can also be used to get electrical energy from light and water. All you need to do, at least in theory, is stick two electrodes in, one in the negative, one in the positive, and you ought to be able to get electricity to light a light bulb. We've demonstrated that this is actually the case. You can see here, you flip the switch and you get the light. So just as water behaves as a light-driven battery, cells actually operate much the same way also as a light-driven battery, something you perhaps never thought of. But think about the cell and what's inside. So inside the cell, you've got large macromolecules, mostly proteins, and these proteins have hydrophilic surfaces. And of course, there's water, lots of water inside the cell. And so what happens is that there are exclusion zones. You have EZ water, which has negative charge. And the positive charges would be lying beyond those negative charges. So the reality is the cell is really crowded with proteins mostly. And this negative EZ practically fills the cell. And what happens is that the positive charges are pushed out and the cell is negative. But negative charges near each other, they repel. They want to get away from one another. And that tendency to repel constitutes potential energy. And this potential energy is basically released in the form of protein folding. That is, the proteins ordinarily occupy one configuration, but they fold. They start this way and they fold into another configuration. So, for example, if this were a muscle cell, the proteins would be in one configuration, and they move to another configuration, and that's what is responsible for your muscle cells contracting, and it allows you to jump. So the way it works, it looks like this. On the left side, here is a typical protein in its extended form, and it's got easy water around it. And what happens is the easy water melts into ordinary water, and the protein is able to fold. But of course, it's got to go back to the original position. And what happens is it does as easy water builds around it. So this is the normal function of a typical protein. And on the right side, imagine what happens with no EZ. You see, with no EZ, it doesn't have the potential to get back to its original configuration. And so it's not working. So your muscle, or whatever cell, is not working properly if it doesn't have EZ water. Of course, if you have some EZ water, then it functions, but not quite as well as if you have a full complement of EZ water. You have potential energy from the EZ, which drives the work of the cell. Light, as I said, is responsible for building the EZ and building negative charge, and that's what gives the cell its energy. And then the energy is consumed as these proteins do the work of the cell, your work, and fold. And if you just connect the dots between the two, so light is actually driving work of your cells, or light is actually driving your function. Well, also inside the cell are structures called mitochondria, and they're known as the energy factory of the cell, central for energy production. And how might that work in terms of the framework of what I've been presenting? Well, look at those membranes inside the cell. Those membranes are hydrophilic surfaces, and as I mentioned, next to hydrophilic surfaces, EZs build. So this is a perfect configuration for building EZs and negative charge and contributing that to the rest of the cell for energy. So where do we get our energy? Well, we get it from food. And obviously, we can get quite a lot of energy under certain circumstances. But we also get it from light. And the light is absorbed by the water. And that light absorption builds EZ and creates energy. Should this matter to you? Well, yeah, I think so. Light matters for function and therefore for health. And water matters for function and therefore for health, because they all build EZs, and the EZs are needed for proper function. So for your health, what builds EZ water in your cells? Well, there are a few things we can think about. First of all, drinking water. Well, water is the raw material for building EZ water, and so obviously you need to be hydrated in order to function properly. Green juicing. The juice is the inside of the cells of the plant. So you're basically extracting EZ water from the plant cells and putting it into your cells. Good strategy, and that's why many integrative medical health professionals suggest that green juicing is the single easiest and best way to maintain your health because of EZ, I believe. There are some substances that are known through the millennia to be good for health, and these are just a couple of examples: turmeric, coconut water. We've studied a half dozen of these experimentally in the laboratory, and we found that putting a certain amount in the water, an amount that corresponds to the amount that might be in your body, builds EZ. It's not published yet, but we're on to it. Sunshine, you go out in the sun, you feel good, you feel healthy, good to be alive. Well, light that you receive builds EZ. And the sauna is perhaps even more effective because the heat means that it's generating infrared light. And infrared light is what builds EZ powerfully and effectively, and that's why you feel good after you come out of the sauna. And finally, grounding, sometimes called earthing, connecting yourself to the ground. Well, you can do this by taking off your shoes and walking on the beach. You see, and you feel good. And why do you feel good? Well, it might be some psychological issue, but you're connecting yourself to the earth. And the earth has been known for a century to be negatively charged. It's a vast repository, practically infinite repository of negative charge. So you soak up this negative charge, which then builds EZ. So are we solar powered? I think we are, like many other living species. And Mother Nature didn't abandon this wonderful mechanism of using light from the sun to give us energy and confer health. And the way this happens, the evidence is showing that this happens through splitting of water, just like the first step of photosynthesis. So we undergo, not just plants, we undergo the first step in photosynthesis. Well, our cells need energy just like cell phones need energy. And some of them, that comes from light, not just food, but light. And within limits, the more light we get, the healthier we are. So seek the sun. Thank you.
So just to drive some other points home, like he talks about hydration, easy water, just to give you a stat, like when it comes to strength training or performance, if you're dehydrated, and they can measure this out via urine samples, how dehydrated you are, your performance can go down by upwards of 20-25%. Your risk of injury can increase by 30 to 40%. Your cognitive function, if you're 1% dehydrated, your cognitive recall and memory is down by 10%. So it's a 1 to 10 ratio. It's just significantly impacts you in many ways. We know we need to drink water, but now we're looking at it from a different perspective here, understanding that the electrical charge of the water is really what's driving this whole system. Folding your proteins, contracting your muscles, it's all dependent upon this easy water. So I believe the next slide is just kind of going into a little bit of a quick deeper dive, quick video on electron donors, which are things that give us electrons naturally. Maybe. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, so it all revolves, no matter what it is, the food, the grounding, the UV or the sunlight, it's all meant to charge water. That's the big takeaway. So electrons equaling energy, which is the cure for reducing inflammation, right? Loss of energy, we gain energy. It's like are you net positive or net negative, right? And in this case, we want to be a net negative to actually be energized.
Battery packs in the human body. On one side, it's how many electrons are we putting in? And there are a lot of electron donors. Electron donors can be getting out in the sun, can be walking barefoot in the grass. It can be leaning up your body up against a tree because the tree has electrons and will donate them to you. Hugging an animal, a common way that makes people in nursing homes feel better is to buy them a dog or a cat. They hold the dog or the cat and get electrons from it. The animal runs outside and recharges itself and brings some back to you. Moving water is an electron donor, whereas still water tends to be an electron stealer. Moving air is an electron stealer. That's why when you ride in a convertible, you look really cool, but you're always tired when you get there because the wind steals electrons from you. On one hand, we look at what things can put electrons in the body, and then what things steal them. And again, the most common stealers are dental infections, emotional baggage, various toxins, particularly the toxins that we are getting from things like GMO foods and pesticides and other kinds of things, air pollution. There's a lot of toxins around us. And of course, one can almost include in the concept emotional baggage. They're toxins in a different way in that they rob us of voltage that we should be using for something else.
Well, I think voltage is a really powerful term to walk away with. It really encapsulates what we're talking about here. So this is, I don't know if the video is going to work, but basically what this guy is doing is he's on rubber Crocs right now on the ground, and he's got a tool to measure voltage. And so you can see it's 0.02 or 0 voltage right now hooked up to his finger. But then when he goes barefoot on the ground, then it sits up to 180, 178. So there's a clear difference between grounding and not grounding. And when he takes it off and he's on the Croc, the rubber sole, it goes back to 0. So then he's testing out wooden shoes, and it goes to 135. So a little bit less than barefoot, but grounding does have a powerful impact on what Dr. Pollack was saying about collecting electrons from the ground, the earth. And so earthing, reducing inflammation. I think this is a powerful image. You got the heat map right here of the back and the calf, and you can see a lot of inflammation going on right here for the individual. And then when they ground, you can see that the inflammation has gone down significantly. So there's been a lot of peer-reviewed research on reducing blood pressure, reducing cortisol. I mean, all these things are very, very powerful. So when you go for a walk, I do this personally. I just take my shoes off and I'm walking my dog. She's on the sidewalk while I'm walking on the grass. When it's wet outside, even better, because water is a good conductor for electricity, right? So getting out there after it rains, but making contact with the ground, very, very powerful. So keep that in mind as you start to embrace this more, right? Getting sunlight, getting grounding, it's a 1-2 combination that you can take advantage of and integrate. So electrons equaling energy, just driving that point home with the easy water. This just signifies your battery pack, the voltage here, electrons charging your body, the mitochondria being able to utilize that to continue to create that protein folding in the body. Those mitochondria use that oxygen, use the water to ultimately power everything that we do. So moving on to the next piece, light. I think this is a powerful message. The fact that we see so little sun as a society is a problem. The sun dictates everything about a human life, in fact, life in general. Getting less sun than ever is hurting everybody's health. So we're indoors more than ever before. We're driving with the windows completely up. You know, you got to crack the windows or be exposed directly to sunlight to get the UVA and UVB spectrums. So you want to get direct sunlight throughout the day, and it's probably one of the biggest deficiencies we have in Western civilization. The farther we get into the city, the harder it is to get direct sunlight more and more and more due to work and everything else. So I want you to look at light as a nutrient, right? We have these different spectrums of light, these different colors, and this is just the visual spectrum of light. We're not talking X-rays or ultraviolet rays or radio waves or anything else, and that can go into EMFs and all this, but we're talking about the visual spectrum from the purple, blue, to green, yellow, and red. These all have different effects on our body. Our hormones react differently, our cells react differently, produce different things. You're probably familiar with D3 production when it comes to sunlight, right? That's just one example of what happens when we get direct sunlight. But back to being exposed to light, artificial light, you can see the different spectrums of light and how much blue light is in the LEDs. The high spikes of green in fluorescent. The incandescent is about the best artificial light you could get in the whole spectrum of things. But sunlight, nothing beats sunlight. You have a mixture of blue and high reds, which we're going to go into the differences between the two, but they're literally polar opposites. Neither is bad, but too much of one thing can be bad, just like nutrients or food. So you got to look at light as a nutrient. If you're indoor all day, it's like you eating the same thing over and over and over and over again. It's going to cause a deficiency somewhere else. It's going to cause some issues elsewhere. And blue light we'll get into in just a little bit. Our bodies are directly tied to this whole system of daylight and nighttime. So the sun goes up and goes down, the moon comes up, our body is completely tied to it. So you have these different rhythms going on, which is a circadian rhythm. There's a peak time when cortisol should spike, a peak time when testosterone should spike, a great time for you to elevate your energy and then produce melatonin to ultimately recover and clean up the whole entire system to have another good day. And what happens with poor sleep, poor sunlight, these deficiencies that I mentioned earlier, it causes a whole cascade of issues, right? To further drive the point home of how connected we are to light, and our eyes probably being the most sensitive organ in the body to actually absorb and really set the cascade for all other bodily function, how the sun is connected to the eyes and vice versa, connects to the optic nerve to your brain, and then ultimately leads to all your peripheral organs and all your systems. right? Your brain is the ultimate hormone gland, and it's going to regulate everything. So I believe it's somewhere to the tune of every 50 minutes, the blood in your body circulates through the eyes to some fashion. So it's always circulating. Blood is always circulating through the eyes and collecting information. And that's what light really is. It's wavelength information that's giving your body the time of day, the spectrum of light to ultimately signal your DNA and your genes. These are called clock genes right here, clock genes. In front of every gene, healthy or unhealthy, whatever makes you up, there is a clock gene in front of it, which means that every gene is tied to light and circadian rhythm. So if there's a dysfunction, it's happening somewhere in the circadian rhythm. So this is all about really optimizing that whole internal clock through light exposure. So when we get natural light, you see the spectrum, how it changes throughout the day. It starts to become, from noon, a peak spectrum of light through the sun, and then starts to get into more of that deep red hue of light, which is very regenerative and very calming. So you can see here in the AM, you'll get a good blue light spectrum, which is very excitatory, elevates cortisol, gets you ramped up, which is what you want. You don't want to be sluggish the first half of the day. But then as the evening or the day goes on, you start to cue the body on what it needs to do hormonally, what it needs to do metabolically. So you can see how this natural rhythm gets messed up when you're introduced to these different lights, right, throughout the day and constantly exposed, and you're not getting any rhythm whatsoever. It's the constant signal all day, every day, which disrupts sleep and throws everything off. So it's important to get multiple exposures to light throughout the day. And at minimum, you want to try to get 5 minutes morning, noon, at night. But the more you can do, the better. So giving an example of blue light versus red light, sleep versus smartphones. Let's just call it blue light. So anything in the screen or artificial light is going to be deep in the blues. Your eyes see the blue light. That starts to signal to the pineal gland, and it signals to hold back melatonin production, which is your body's antioxidant, to really clear out the system, to remove those oxidative species, to help to retain and gain electrons while you sleep. And melatonin production can be suppressed by up to 90 minutes through exposure of blue light at night. So general rule is you want to, once when the sun starts going down, put on red shades, red light laser shades, or remove the artificial light. Get off the phone as much as you can and allow for your melatonin production to start kicking in to get a good night's sleep. Because otherwise, we've all had it, bad night's sleep leads to loss of energy, and we feel that. Not to mention the impacts it has long term. Versus red light, we talk about infrared and red light, these spectrums that provides heat as well as the hue, which provides energy, eye health, brain health, mitochondrial health, detoxification, mental health, inflammation, reduction because you're gaining energy because it's recovery, and better deep sleep. So moving on, getting into the deeper concept of, okay, light is fueling this, it's charging the easy water. We understand that mitochondria is charging our body, creating more voltage. We need to collect more electrons. Food is an electron donor as well. And we kind of went over it with Dr. Pollack, but the sun fueling the grass and the soil for the cows or the animals to eat nutritionally dense food, they are collecting light code. They're collecting light code from not only the sun, but from the plants, and them too are absorbing the same things that we need to absorb through the food that holds on to those electrons, which ultimately feed the easy water in our body. So local food, how it pertains to our health and our voltage and our energy, reducing inflammation and increasing our testosterone and our vitality. Goes from the sun, grass, animal, environment, all the way through. Your gut is actually tied to reading light as well. So they've been recently really exposing the effects of gut bacteria and food when it comes to light. Because when you digest food, you actually emit light. You're eating light. That's what you're doing. So your bacteria will actually shape and reform itself based on what code it's getting. So if you're getting, we'll get into it, but if you're eating a local animal, something within your longitude and area, it's getting the same light code, it's getting the same information, and your gut is now getting that same information as well, tuning you to that circadian rhythm. Versus what I call food jet lag, where we've all had jet lag before. You got a cow from Brazil or wherever else, right? And it's getting a different light code, a different spectrum, a different circadian rhythm, and you're absorbing that information into your gut, which leads to disturbance not only in the cell, but your sleep and everything else, which throws off your recovery, throws off the function of mitochondria, which leads to lower voltage, less electrons, less charge. So ultimately, that's how you're cracking the quantum code, is by pertaining to these things: the timing, the sunlight exposure, proper hydration, and food, looking at it from a completely different perspective on how you collect electrons. You look at it from that perspective, things get much more simple, and you start to look at good food choices, good sources, and ultimately good healthy lifestyle practices, and you're going to be well on your way to taking care of 80% of what hormone optimization is, TRT was trying to claim to fix, all these things, just by optimizing these few lifestyle choices. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions?
All right, so that's it for the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. And if you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you and answer any questions that you have. And as for that offer, if you want to learn more about how you can really make this stick into your life, it's not about just getting good information, but it's a matter of how you integrate it and personalize it into your life, then go ahead and click the link in the description below. It's going to take you to my website where it's going to just explain the system in more detail. It's going to provide proof of work before and afters and video testimonials of the men that I've worked with and how we've holistically optimized not only their hormones, but their life. And so if you want to learn more about that, click that link and you can schedule a call where we can talk about your needs, your goals, and ultimately getting you from where you are to where you want to be in a systematic, integrative, natural way. So I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.